Hello, good listeners. Welcome to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, where we bring you stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dick. This Thanksgiving weekend, we're featuring a story by Gerhard Ens. Gerhard was a teacher, newspaper editor, broadcaster, and storyteller. Originally written and told in the Low German language, Enz's story, titled The First Threshing in Canada, 1876, paints an historic but fictional picture of the first grain harvest for Mennonites who had arrived in southern Manitoba just 2 years earlier. Gerhard's story is told through the eyes of 10-year-old Henry. Papa, don't people in this land ever take time to thresh their grain? Papa was silent, as usual. Little Henry couldn't bear the long pauses between his questions and Papa's answers. While waiting, Henry fondly reflected on his former home in the Kronstadt village of Gortitz Colony in Imperial Russia. Henry had loved threshing season in Kronstadt. His dad had owned a large farm and 8 big, strong horses. Papa had grown wheat, rye, barley, and oats, and then mowed the ripened grain, let it dry, and threshed it. They'd worked with a horse-powered threshing machine called a Draschmaschine in Low German. Pairs of horses walking in a circle turned a large wheel that powered the machine. At the front of the threshing machine, a man called the stook feeder grabbed the bundles of grain from another worker who'd cut open the sheaves of grain. The stook feeder then fed the bundle of ripened and dried grain into the cylinder, quickly, efficiently, and repeatedly. The cylinder spun so swiftly it knocked the kernels of grain out of the stalks. A fanning mill blew away the chaff, leaving the kernels to collect on the threshing floor, where more workers scooped the grain into burlap sacks. The stalks of straw shot out the back of the threshing machine, where hired hands immediately swept it into a large pile. The work was hard, but the men enjoyed seeing the golden kernels of ripe grain. It smelled so wonderful. No one seemed bothered by the clouds of grain dust that surrounded them. That's how it had been in Kronstadt. But now they lived in Rhineland, Manitoba. For the past 2 years, Henry had not seen any threshing taking place, so he'd asked his dad whether no threshing happened here in Canada. Papa remained quiet. Henry knew that if he waited long enough, his dad would eventually answer, and so he did. You will see. Most often that was all Papa said. He'd said the same thing last fall, as he hauled the 2 sacks of seed wheat from Peter Wientz, the village administrator. Those kernels of hard red wheat were slightly smaller than the seed they'd had in Kronstadt. Here in Manitoba, grain was to be seeded in spring, not in fall, as they had always done back home. Papa, he wanted to know, how will you sow the wheat? We don't have our disker and plow to make wide furrows. They certainly didn't. In Kronstadt, they'd had all the farm machinery they needed to plow and cultivate the soil and to seed and harvest the crop. Last fall, Papa broke up 6 acres with just a single furrow plow drawn by their oxen. The turned furrows were shiny black, clean. Papa said he really needed a 4-row cultivator to break up and level the dense prairie sod. In spring, after the frost was out of the soil, Papa had harrowed this new field with a harrow he'd built himself, mostly out of wood. Hitched to their team of oxen, the harrow broke down the clumps to further level the soil. Next, he'd walked over the whole 6 acres, scattering the 2 sacks of seed by hand. Then he harrowed the small field again to settle the seeds into the soil. Spring and summer brought some good rains. The wheat had sprouted well, and as it grew and ripened, Henry wondered how they would harvest the wheat. In Kronstadt, they'd hitched 2 or 3 of their horses to a mower. Papa walked behind the outfit, pushing the grain stalks off the machine by hand. Hired workers followed and tied bundles of loose stalks into sheaves. Henry had not seen any machinery like that in Manitoba. When he asked his dad, Papa answered, "You will soon see." At harvest time, Henry had seen. Papa took the big scythe he'd brought from Kronstahl and reassembled it. He sharpened its blade to a fine edge. He walked over to the 6-acre field and with a mighty swing into the ripened grain, cut the wheat down. He swung the scythe again and again, back and forth. Soon the cut wheat lay in tidy swaths and in a straight row. Young Henry watched from as close as he could get until Papa warned him, "Don't stand so close. I might not see you and cut into your legs." After Papa had one long swath down, he raked a small bundle of wheat stalks together with both hands to make a sheaf. Henry was about to ask Papa where he'd get the string to tie it together. He watched Papa gather some stalks and twist a handful around the large bundle. Then, with 2 nimble turns, he tied them together. The sheaf was made. Papa said, "Good thing I haven't forgotten how to do that. This is how I learned to bind sheaves from my own father. Henry, you will have to learn to do this yet, too." It became Henry's job to collect the cut stalks into large bundles so that Papa could tie them into sheaves. The sheaves were bundled together into stooks and stood on end to speed up drying. Father and son worked together many hours under the hot sun. "Be careful," Papa told him. "Leave nothing behind. We will need every last stalk." Toward the end of the day, Henry tried tying a few bundles into sheaves himself. The next step was to free the grain from the stalks. Henry could not imagine how this would work without machinery. The stooks on the field dried well over the next few days, but with no threshing machine in sight, he asked his papa how they would thresh here in Rhineland. Again, Papa just said, "You will see," and kept on working. Henry watched as Papa continued to prepare for threshing. He shook out a bunch of dusty burlap sacks, then leveled out a portion of their farmyard and packed the ground to make a hard threshing floor. Next, he hauled out the large wooden pitchfork he'd brought from Kronstahl. Then he turned his attention to a huge stone nearby. It was shaped like a long cylinder with large cogs carved across its length. Henry asked what kind of stone this was, but Papa answered, as he always did, "You will see." Papa continued preparing. Henry helped hitch the animals to the grain wagon. The oxen, Tom and Jim, were quite tame and seemed to know their job. They pulled the wagon to the field where Papa filled the wagon with sheaves, then hauled the load back to the yard. Now Henry was really curious. He watched as Papa spread the sheaves on the hardened threshing floor, cut them all open, and spread them loosely in a circle. Then he hitched Tom and Jim to the stone cylinder with the cogs on it and led them to the sheaves. "Oh, but Papa, why break up these beautiful sheaves of wheat?" Henry saw only the destruction of their previous hard work. This time, Papa didn't just say, "You will see." He stopped, smiled, and picked up a handful of stalks. He said, "See here, Henry? These heads have to be knocked about a bit, threshed, to loosen and free the kernels from the chaff and the long stalks." Papa vigorously shook the heads of wheat into his hand and huffed a forceful breath across what fell out. In his hand lay the golden kernels of wheat. Papa peered at them closely. He seemed satisfied with the plump kernels. He gave Henry a small handful. "Taste," he said. Henry crunched a few hard kernels with his teeth and chewed them into a soft, doughy glob. "Delicious!" "See," said Papa, "this is our threshing time, just the way we threshed in Kronstahl before we began to drash with machinery." Papa got back to work. "Tom and Jim, get up," he called. Slowly the 2 oxen began to move, and the stone roller was set in motion. Papa encouraged the oxen as they plodded around in a circle, pulling the stone roller over the sheaves of wheat, while he and Henry piled on more. As the oxen kept circling, the layer of straw, chaff, and kernels grew thicker and higher on the threshing floor. At last, Papa steered the oxen off the pile. "So," he said to Henry, "now scoop the straw off the top." Using his hands, Henry gathered the straw into bundles again. Papa took his large pitchfork and carried the straw off to the side, where he heaped it into a stack to use in winter. When all the straw had been cleared away, Papa raked the chaff into a pile with his large pitchfork. Then he scooped up big handfuls of chaff and kernels and tossed them high into the air. "See how the wheat kernels separate from the chaff? We have enough wind to clean it," Papa said. Henry watched as the chaff drifted away in the breeze and the wheat kernels fell to the ground. Papa picked up his chaff fork and flung forkful after forkful of chaff and kernels up into the air. The clean grain fell onto the threshing floor. "Son," said Papa, "now you will hold up the sacks." Henry gripped the burlap sacks and held them firmly so that Papa could scoop the grain into them with the wooden shovel he'd carved last winter. "So," said Papa after all the grain had been cleared away, "we'll thresh one more load of sheaves, and that will be the end of this workday." Henry could tell that Papa was feeling happy and satisfied with their first wheat in Rhineland. Henry, too, felt cheerful. Seeding time, harvest time, and threshing time was happening here, too. The field and yard smelled of ripened wheat, and the heavy sacks full of grain stood ready to be carted to Giesbrecht's mill. Soon, Mama would have a supper of fried potatoes and thickened milk ready for them, just like in Kronstadt during threshing days. Tomorrow would be Sunday. They would meet their neighbors in the new church building that they had built last spring. One of their two ministers, John Wiebe or Jacob Wientz, would read a long sermon in High German. Henry might not be able to understand most of it, but afterward Mr. Wiebe would speak to them in Low German, the everyday language of home and farm. He would probably tell them again how fortunate they were to be here in Rhineland. After lunch, Henry and his family might visit the family of Peter Wientz, their village's lead administrator. Henry and the Wientz boy would explore the creek. Would they talk about life back in Kronstadt again? Oh, no. Always talking and thinking about Kronstadt was too boring. No, Henry and Peter would recount how threshing was done in Rhineland, just like their two papas did, about how the wheat poured so fine into the sacks, and how heavy those filled sacks were. You've been listening to The First Threshing in Canada, a story by Gerhard Ens set in Manitoba in 1876. The Mennonite Heritage Archives in Winnipeg holds a collection of audio tape stories told in Low German by Gerhard Ens, his book, and photos. The music selections are from the CMBC and Faith and Life choirs. To learn more or listen to this episode again, visit mharchives.ca. If you have questions or comments about this program, dash off an email to info@mharchives.ca.
Hello, I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. The Mennonite Heritage Archives is a community-supported memory center that relies on donations from community members like you. To support this program and the preservation of Mennonite history, visit mharchives.ca and click on Support, or give us a call at 204-560-1998. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and Golden West Radio.
In upcoming episodes, I'll talk with Andrew Unger. We'll get a behind-the-mind look at the satire he writes for his website, The Unger Review. The script for today's story was translated from Low German and written by Helene Workington and adapted for radio by me. As always, thanks to the Tales team of Conrad Stace and David Klippenstein. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back soon with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.